My name is Daniel Harris, and I have lived in Barrow, Alaska my entire life. The town has always been quiet, remote, the kind of place where winter feels endless and the sea carries whispers through the fog. But everything changed 2 weeks ago. When the emergency lockdown was announced, the police said there was a danger to public safety. They told everyone to stay inside after dark. They did not explain why. Nobody believed them at first. People still stepped outside after midnight, just to prove nothing was wrong. Then the disappearances began. It started with Mrs. Carter from the house across the street. She was a retired nurse, always kind, always visible in the small grocery store by the docks. One night, her house light stayed on, but she never appeared again. No one saw her leave. The door was locked from the inside. The next night, it was the Watson brothers, both gone before morning. Their snowmobiles were still parked outside. Their porch light flickered all night. Barrow is a small town. News travels fast. Fear travels faster. People whispered about something caught on the security cameras. I heard a rumor that the police had found a pale figure in the footage, a white shadow. It appeared every night just after midnight. I did not believe in ghosts, but then Officer Raymond came to my door 3 nights ago. His eyes were red, as if he had not slept in days. He told me to check my back door lock twice before midnight. He told me not to look outside after 12. He did not explain why. That night, I lay in bed, listening to the wind claw at the windows. The cold seemed sharper than usual. My clock read 12:03 when I heard it. A sound like footsteps in the snow, slow, deliberate, right outside my window. I wanted to look. My breath fogged in the air, though my heater was on. Then something shifted in the corner of my vision. A faint, pale blur moved past the glass. My heart slammed in my chest. I froze. The next morning I checked the snow outside my house. There were no footprints. I could not sleep the next night. The house felt different now. Every creak of the floor, every sigh of the wind seemed heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Around 11:30, I saw flashing blue lights outside my window. A police cruiser stopped 2 houses down. 2 officers stepped out, their boots sinking into the snow. They moved toward the Miller residence. The Millers were an older couple, Harold and Linda. They never left town. I saw Harold standing at his front porch earlier that day, his face pale. Now the house was dark, except for the thin yellow glow, bleeding from the kitchen window. I watched the officers knock. No response. They tried the door. It opened slowly. One of them drew his flashlight and stepped inside. Minutes passed. Then I heard shouting. One officer staggered backward out the door, his voice rising sharply. The other followed, gripping his radio, speaking too fast for me to catch the words. I could not see inside the house. Only a flash of movement. Something pale by the doorway. For a second, I thought I saw Linda standing there, but her skin looked wrong. Too white, like frost. Her eyes fixed on the officers without blinking. Then she stepped forward, and the light from the porch hit her face. It was not Linda. Her features looked melted, almost smooth, as if something had pulled her skin tight in strange places. Her mouth moved, but there was no sound. The officers slammed the door shut. One ran to the car. The cruiser sped away, tires cutting deep grooves into the snow. I stayed at my window long after they were gone, waiting to see if the door would open again. It never did. The next morning, the Miller house stood silent. The curtains were drawn. The driveway was empty. Harold and Linda were gone. That afternoon, a new notice went out from the town hall. No one was allowed outside after 10 p.m. now. The curfew tightened. Patrol cars circled the neighborhoods, but none of it mattered. Everyone knew the thing came after midnight, and it did not care about curfews. That night, I heard scratching at my back door. The scratching started softly. At first I thought it was the wind pushing dry branches against the siding. But the sound had a rhythm. 3 slow strokes, then a pause. 3 more. each one sharper, closer. My clock read 12:04. I stood frozen in the kitchen. The back door was only a few feet away. Beyond it was the porch, and beyond that, the endless snow stretching toward the frozen coastline. The scratching grew louder. I reached for the light switch, but stopped. The police had told us not to draw attention, not to look. My hand hovered in the dark, my breath steadying into the cold silence. Then came a sound that made my skin crawl. A slow drag, like nails moving, down the door itself. I backed away, step by step, until my heel bumped the counter. The refrigerator hummed faintly behind me. The scratching stopped. I waited, the air heavy in my chest. A full minute passed, then two. My shoulders eased slightly. Then I heard it, a voice that it was faint, just above a whisper, as if someone stood, right outside the wood. My name, spoken in a long drawn breath. Daniel. I felt the blood leave my face. No one should know that I was awake. No one should be at my door at this hour. The voice came again, lower this time, stretching the syllables as if savoring them. Daniel. I wanted to run to my bedroom and lock the door, but my legs would not move. My eyes stayed fixed on the thin gap beneath the back door. That was when I saw it. A shadow, white against the blackness of the porch. It shifted slowly, as if bending low to the threshold. The handle turned. Metal clicked softly in the silence. I bolted from my bedroom, slamming the door and throwing the lock. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would shake the walls. I pressed my ear to the wood, listening silence. I waited there until the first light of dawn slipped through my curtains. When I checked the back door that morning, the handle was cold. A thin line of frost had spread from the metal across the glass. There were no footprints in the snow. I told myself I would not look again. I told myself I would follow every rule. But the rules did not stop the disappearances. 3 more people were gone by the next night. An entire family on Kaktovik Street vanished before morning. Their windows were found open. No signs of forced entry. By then, the town was unraveling. Some houses were boarded shut, others stood empty. Patrol cars circled, but no one got out unless they had to. I saw Officer Raymond again that afternoon. His uniform looked wrinkled, his face hollow. He told me quietly that the police were reviewing the latest security footage. Then he said something that made my stomach twist. They think it chooses its next house before midnight. That night I sat in the dark, staring at my back door. I kept hearing the voice. Even in silence, the sound of it stayed in my head. The way it drew my name, slow and cold, as if it had been speaking it long before I was born. At 11:47, I made a decision. I pulled on my jacket, slid my phone into my pocket, and stepped outside. The air cut my face like broken glass. My boots crunched on the hard snow. I felt the weight of the silence pressing from all sides. The street was empty. I moved past the Miller house. The windows were dark, but the front door stood slightly open. A faint trail of frost led from the doorway down the porch steps. Something inside me said to keep walking. I ignored it. I pushed the door gently. The hinges groaned. The air inside was colder than outside, and it smelled faintly of salt water, though the ocean was miles away. The living room was empty, furniture covered in frost. On the far wall, a dark mark stretched from floor to ceiling, a smear that looked almost like the outline of a hand. I stepped closer. It was not paint. The surface of the wall was warped, the wood bent inward, as if something had pressed against it from the other side. A whisper broke the silence. Not my name this time. A single word I could not understand. It slid along the edges of my mind like ice. I turned toward the sound on the hallway. Just beyond the kitchen, a figure stood, white, motionless. It was facing me. The figure did not move. It stood at the end of the hallway. Its head tilted slightly, as if studying me. Its body seemed stretched, not in shape, but in the way light bent around it. as though the air near it was thinner. Its skin, if that was skin, was pale like the surface of snow under a full moon. No detail, no texture, just smooth and endless, as if it had been carved from frost. Its face had no features, but I felt its gaze sink into me. The room grew colder. My breath poured out in thick clouds. My fingers stiffened around the edge of the doorframe. I wanted to speak, but the air in my chest felt heavy, frozen in place. The figure stepped forward. The movement was wrong, not like walking. Each step seemed to erase the space between us without the sound of contact. It did not disturb the floorboards. It did not leave a shadow. Something in my head began to ring. A thin, high sound, like metal bending under strain. It grew louder with each of its steps. I stumbled back, my boots scraping against the frosted floor. My heels struck the coffee table, and I nearly fell. The figure stopped just short of the living room. It raised its head slightly. I saw the wall behind it bend, just like the warped wood earlier, as if the air itself could not hold its weight. Then it lifted its arm. The pale surface shifted as a long hand unfolded, impossibly thin, stretching, farther than bone should allow. The tips hovered above the floor, and frost began to spread outward in veins across the boards. I felt my chest tighten, a crushing pressure crawling upward into my throat. My vision blurred at the edges. Somewhere far away, I heard a sound. It was a door slamming. The figure turned its head sharply toward the noise, then looked back at me. The ringing in my skull stopped as suddenly as it had started, and then, in a blink, it was gone. The living room stood empty. Only frost remained, stretching in long, thin streaks toward where it had stood. I stumbled out of the house into the freezing air, gasping for breath. From the corner of my eye, I thought I saw it again, at the far end of the street. Watching, I ran home without looking back. My boots tore through the snow, my breath sharp and ragged. When I reached my door, I locked it twice, then dragged a chair against the handle. For hours, I sat in the dark, staring at the frost creeping along my window pane. By morning, the frost was gone, but the silence outside was worse than the cold. Around noon, there was a knock at my front door. I froze, waiting for the sound again. Then came a voice. It was Officer Raymond. I opened the door just enough to see his face. His eyes looked even worse than before. Red, sunken, rimmed with sleeplessness. He stepped inside without asking, scanning the room as if expecting something to be there. His voice was low. "You saw it, did you not?" I could not answer at first. I nodded. He closed the curtains and sat at my table. His hands shook slightly as he rubbed his temples. He told me about the cameras, how they had been watching houses disappear one by one. Every time the same thing happened. Just after midnight, a white shadow appeared in the footage, sometimes at a door, sometimes in the yard, always motionless at first. Then it moved, and the camera would distort. The image warped as if something was bending the air. When the screen cleared, the person in the house was gone. No forced entry, no sound, no sign of struggle. I asked him what it was. He hesitated. He said there was an old story in the town, one that locals never spoke about, two outsiders, something that came with the longest nights of winter, a thing that traveled the snow when the sea ice pressed too far inland. I told him I saw it inside the Miller house. He stared at me for a long moment, then said something that made my stomach turn. "If you have seen it this close, it will come back for you." That night, I did not try to sleep. I stayed in the kitchen with the lights off, the chair still pressed against the back door. The clock crept toward midnight at 12:06. The scratching began again. This time, it was at my front door. The scratching at the front door was different. This time, not slow and careful like before. It was steady, dragging down the wood in long, deliberate strokes. My breath felt heavy in my chest. The chair against the back door suddenly felt useless. Every inch of my house felt too small, too thin to keep it out. I stood frozen in the hallway, my eyes locked on the door. The gap beneath it was dark. The scratching stopped. Silence. Then, a single knock. It was soft, almost polite, but it made every hair on my neck rise. I backed away slowly, trying to stay quiet. My socks slid on the cold floor. Another knock. The air in the room grew colder. Frost began to creep across the edges of the doorframe, spreading like veins across the wall. The sound of the wood groaning filled the silence. I stepped into the living room, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The windows along the far wall looked black in the night. My reflection stared back at me from the glass. Then, I realized there was another shape in the reflection. White, standing outside. It was motionless, its head slightly tilted. I turned toward the window, but there was nothing there. Only snow and the empty street. A faint sound came from the kitchen. The back door. The chair against it scraped across the floor, moving on its own. The handle began to turn slowly. Metal clicking in the silence. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find. A heavy lamp hand stepped back. The door did not open. The handle stopped. Then, from the other side, a voice whispered my name. Each syllable. Long and cold. Daniel. The sound came from everywhere at once. From the front door. From the windows. From the walls themselves. I stumbled back until my shoulders hit the wall. My breath was white in the freezing air. Then the voice stopped, and, all at once, the house was silent. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for the next sound. But nothing came. When the first pale light of morning slipped through the curtains, the frost on the doors was gone. But there was something new, on the inside of the front door. Faint and white, a single handprint was pressed into the wood. I stared at the handprint until my legs felt numb. It was faint, almost transparent, but I could see the shape of the fingers stretching too long, curling slightly, as if pressing deeper into the wood than the surface allowed. I needed to get out of the house. I needed answers. By mid-morning, I forced myself outside. The town felt hollow, like it was holding its breath. More windows were boarded up. Cars sat abandoned under a thin layer of frost. I saw no one on the street, except for a single figure, walking toward the old church, at the edge of town. It was not an officer. I followed at a distance. The wind carried no sound, except the crunch of my boots. The figure disappeared inside the church, the heavy wooden doors closing behind them. I hesitated at the steps. The church had been shut down years ago, its windows black with dust, its bell tower silent. I pushed the door. It creaked open slowly. Inside, the air was thick with cold dust swirled in the pale light from the high windows. Candles burned faintly along the altar, though no one had tended to them in years. At the far end of the aisle, the figure stood facing the altar, an old man. His coat was frayed, his hair silver and wild. He turned as if he had been expecting me. "You have seen it," he said. His voice was low, but steady. His eyes were sharp, the kind that had watched something for a long time. I told him everything. The scratching, the voice, the shadow in the hallway. He nodded slowly. "It walks when the night is longest," he said. "It takes those it marks." I asked him if it could be stopped. He looked past me toward the heavy church doors, as if listening to something outside. Then he said, "It does not enter a place where it is not invited. But once it marks your door, you are already inside its path." I felt the blood drain from my face. The old man stepped closer, lowering his voice. "There is one way to stand against it, but it is not without cost." Before I could ask what he meant, a sound echoed from outside, scratching, not at the church door, at the windows. The scratching at the church windows was sharp and fast, like claws dragging along the glass. The old man did not flinch. He moved to the altar, pulling aside a section of the wood to reveal something hidden beneath. A bundle wrapped in thick cloth. He unwrapped it carefully, his breath slow, as if each motion carried weight. Inside was a long, narrow piece of driftwood. carved with deep, strange markings that seemed to move in the candlelight. He glanced at me. Once it finds you here, it will not stop until the walls fall. The scratching spread to the far windows, circling the church. The sound was constant now, too fast for any normal movement. The candles flickered hard, their flames bending toward the windows. A cold draft swept through the aisles. The old man raised the carved driftwood. His voice dropped to a low murmur, speaking words I could not understand. The air in the church thickened, the sound outside growing louder. Closer then came a sound from above, the bell it had not rung in years. But now it tolled once, the heavy note echoing through the frozen air. Dust fell from the rafters. The old man's voice grew louder, sharper, each word cracking like ice. I looked toward the stained glass windows. Something white was pressing against them from outside. No face, no details, just a smooth, pale surface pushing forward, as if trying to bleed through the glass. Cracks spiderwebbed across the panes. The old man turned sharply to me. If the glass breaks, it will not be held back. The wood in his hands glowed faintly now, the carvings burning with a dim light. His voice rose to a near shout. The sound outside changed. No more scratching. Now it was a deep, low hum that seemed to vibrate through my ribs. The windows bowed inward. Frost exploded across the walls. The old man's voice cut off suddenly. I turned to him. His eyes were fixed on the altar. The driftwood had gone cold in his hands. From the darkened far end of the church, the air began to bend, pulling inward. The shadow was inside. The air inside the church bent inward, as if the walls themselves were being drawn toward the far aisle. The candles guttered out, one by one, until only the pale winter light from the windows remained. The white shadow emerged. From the dark dot, it was taller now, stretching toward the rafters, its form bending in ways my mind struggled to hold. It moved without sound, each step collapsing the distance between us. The old man stepped forward, the driftwood gripped tight in his hands. His voice cut through the silence, low and sharp, the same strange words as before. The carvings along. The wood began to glow again, brighter, hot enough to make the air waver. The shadow paused, its head tilted, almost curious, as if it recognized the sound. The frost on the walls stopped spreading. For a moment I thought it might retreat. Then it moved. In a blur, the white shadow crossed the space between them. The air screamed, a pressure so heavy, I fell to my knees. The old man thrust the driftwood forward, the light flaring so bright, it burned my vision white. The shadow's form twisted. The surface of it rippled, no longer smooth, as if something inside was breaking apart. A deep, hollow sound filled the church. Not a scream, but something colder, like the wind tearing across empty ice. The walls shook, dust falling in long streams from the rafters. The old man shouted one final word and drove the driftwood into the floor. The light exploded outward. For a moment, everything was still. The air was warm again. The frost was gone. I opened my eyes. The old man stood, slumped at the altar. The driftwood cracked in his hands. The white shadow was gone, but the church no longer felt empty. I stepped toward him, but he looked past me, toward the high windows. His voice was barely a whisper. It will not stay gone. A faint sound rose from outside, scratching. This time, it was at the church doors. The old man turned to me, his eyes sharp despite the weight in his voice. Run. I stepped back toward the doors. The sound growing louder, sharper. My breath came fast. As I pushed the doors open, the cold air rushed in, carrying the endless white of the snow and the echo of something moving just out of sight. I ran into the blinding light, not daring to look back. The scratching followed.